it is 6 o'clock p.m., so we will start this meeting of the Chippewa Falls School Board at exactly 6 o'clock p.m. But call to order. And clerk, can we start with a roll call, please?
Dennis Beer.
Here.
Sharon Jackson. Here. Sharon Applebaum. Steve Arno.
Here.
Katie McMillan. Here. Steve Olson.
Here.
Dave Jack.
Here. All right, we do have a quorum. Next is 1.03, approval of the agenda. Any questions regarding the agenda? Otherwise, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Motion by McKillop. Is there a second? Second by Beer. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved as presented. Before we go on to the next part, communicating with the board, I want to say a few words. First of all, Sharon McElroy, Vice President, is not here tonight. She cares very much about this board. She's double booked. She's also on the town of Lafayette, and they had a meeting tonight, so just wanted to make you aware of that. Secondly, if there's a Jennifer Adrian here, I know you called me this morning. I apologize. We try to return calls if we can, but in the last couple of weeks, I did not have. She said she was. Okay, well, anyway, her or anyone else, we try to get a hold of you. We try to get in touch with people, and finding 5 minutes is not always possible. So, finally, with regards to tonight's meeting, the way it's going to go is we are essentially going to have a presentation from the district and from the members of the committee that put this recommendation together. Then we're going to have public comment where people are going to be allowed to speak, and we'll tell you, the rules and what you're going to be allowed to say. And then at the end, the board is going to have an opportunity to discuss with ourselves and decide what we're going to do here tonight. Now, during that entire time, when you're speaking, we're going to be respectful. We're not going to shout each other down. Nobody's going to stop you from talking. Same thing when the district is doing their presentation, and the same thing when we're discussing it. Everybody's going to get an opportunity to speak. You should all know we care very much about the issues that you're bringing up tonight. We all have kids. We all know exactly what it would like, why you move to certain districts. This is a very difficult thing to do. So we just ask that we're going to listen to you, you listen to us, and we'll get through this in the way that's best for our community. So with that, we'll start with the presentation of the EBRC recommendation, and that is going to start with Superintendent Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Check. Good evening, board members, families, students, and community members. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Elementary Boundary Review Committee's recommendation for adjusting our elementary school attendance boundaries. After months of thorough analysis, community engagement, and careful deliberation, we are presenting what we believe is a balanced, thoughtful approach that addresses our district's needs while being mindful of disruption to students and families. Before diving into our recommendation, I'd like to briefly summarize the EBRC's processes. The EBRC was formed to analyze enrollment data, demographic trends, and facility capacities to ensure balanced access to education and optimal resource utilization. Over the past several months, we've reviewed extensive data from district records, the Applied Population Laboratory Study, and the ATSR facility assessment. We engaged the community through 2 public sessions and collected valuable feedback that directly influenced our final recommendation. The committee thoroughly evaluated 18 different scenarios before developing the amalgamated recommendation we're presenting tonight. The challenges driving our work include several key factors. First, we're experiencing imbalanced facility utilization with schools like Homestead at 88% capacity, while others like Parkview are at just 70%. We've observed significant class size disparities across schools, particularly in the K-3 grades where consistency is crucial for literacy development. Overall, our district has seen a 12.8% enrollment decline system-wide over the past 5 years, requiring thoughtful resource allocation. Additionally, Wisconsin Act 20 places emphasis on K-3 literacy instruction, making consistent class sizes in these grades particularly important. Our recommendation is grounded in 5 core principles. First, educational excellence, targeting consistent K-3 class sizes of 18 to 22 students to align with literacy progress requirements. Second, balanced utilization, creating more equitable distribution of students across facilities. Third, phased implementation, addressing disruption through a gradual approach. Fourth, community responsiveness, incorporating public feedback while balancing educational needs. And finally, long-term planning, establishing a framework for regular evaluation cycles to adapt to changing demographics. Our recommendation is a 3-phase implementation approach that addresses immediate needs while maintaining flexibility for the future. Phase 1 for the 2025-2026 school year includes targeted boundary adjustments affecting approximately 52 to 58 students. Phase 2 for 2026-2027 school year would involve additional potential adjustments based on evaluation of Phase 1 outcomes and projected 2025-2026 student enrollment figures. Phase 3 in 2027-2028 would be a comprehensive evaluation of all changes to determine if additional adjustments are needed. This phased approach allows us to make necessary changes while continually assessing impact. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Trowbridge for further explanations.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Phase 1. Phase 1 involves 2 primary boundary adjustments. First, moving expanded Area 2 from Hillcrest to Parkview. This area is north of Bridgewater Avenue, east of Highway 53, north of the northernmost boundary. This adjustment responds directly to community input about preserving neighborhood cohesion. Current 3rd through 5th grade students would be grandfathered, allowing them to remain in Hillcrest. Second adjustment moves Area 3 from Homestead to Southview. This area is east of Highway 124, west of Highway 53, north of the 29 and 53 interchange. This change reduces Homestead's grade 3 class sizes from 22.7 to 19.7 students and addresses capacity concerns at Homestead while improving Southview's utilization. Since the amalgamated proposal was first analyzed, we did another analysis today with our current enrollment projections that we have in place, and we discovered that our classroom size predictions are more favorable than before. Only one bubble currently exists. This map illustrates the boundary change from Hillcrest to Parkview. You can see expanded Area 2 highlighted in purple, which extends from Bridgewater Avenue northward. This adjustment preserves neighborhood cohesion by keeping families south of Bridgewater Avenue at Hillcrest while moving the northern section to Parkview. This change will help balance enrollment between these 2 schools and chiefly evolved out of feedback from public session number 2. This map shows the movement of Area 3 from Homestead to Southview. This adjustment addresses capacity concerns at Homestead while improving utilization at Southview. The boundary follows natural dividing lines along highways, making it easier for families to understand which school they attend based on their location. In Phase 2, we would evaluate whether an additional adjustment is necessary from Homestead to Stilson. This decision would be based on enrollment patterns and class size analysis after Phase 1 implementation. It's important to note that this phase is contingent on the outcomes of Phase 1. We're deliberately building this into the evaluation period to ensure we make data-driven decisions rather than implementing all changes at once. This approach allows us to be responsive to actual enrollment patterns rather than just projections. This map shows the potential Phase 2 adjustment, moving Area 4 from Homestead to Stilson. Again, this change would only be implemented if deemed necessary based on our evaluation of Phase 1 outcomes and enrollment patterns. We'll be monitoring Stilson's utilization rate closely as it approaches 90% capacity, which could limit the amount of flexibility there. By the completion of our phased implementation, we project significant improvements in facility utilization rates. Homestead would decrease from 88% to 77%, relieving current overcrowding concerns. Hillcrest would shift from 85% to 67%, accounting for smaller classroom sizes in that building. Parkview would increase from 70% to 84%, making better use of available space. Southview would improve from 73% to 78%, and if phase 2 is implemented, Stilson would increase from 84% to 90%. Most importantly, these adjustments would create more consistent class size across all elementary schools, particularly in the critical K-3 grades, as Mr. Holm mentioned before. At this time, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Holmes to complete the presentation.
Thank you, Chad. Successful implementation will require thoughtful transition support for affected students and families. We're recommending dedicated support programs, including buddy systems for new students and cross-school activities to build relationships. Transportation impacts include approximately 106 students directly affected by phase 1, requiring the addition of 2 buses, one for Homestead and one for Parkview routes. We're committed to developing a streamlined process for sibling consideration requests to minimize family disruption. It's worth noting that these changes create minimal shifts in economic status indicators, with changes of only 1 to 2% at affected schools. These considerations would be communicated to affected families by Thursday evening of April 10th. This phased approach provides several significant long-term benefits. It supports educational alignment with Wisconsin Act 20's literacy requirements through consistent K-3 class sizes. It optimizes resources by balancing facility utilization without overcrowding. It creates a predictable planning framework with clear timelines that respect families' needs for stability. It establishes a sustainable process for regular boundary reviews on a 3 to 5 year cycle. It also builds in flexibility to respond to unforeseen demographic shifts. While the 20-year period since our last boundary adjustment will be impossible to duplicate given declining enrollment trends, this approach provides a foundation for responsible district planning. Contingency plans were developed for various enrollment scenarios. If enrollment declines accelerate beyond projections, we can implement expedited reviews on 1 to 2 year cycles and potentially establish flex boundaries for annual adjustments and/or consider school closures or consolidations. For stabilized enrollment, we would maintain a planned 3 to 5 year review cycle with targeted marketing to potentially balance school populations through a voluntary process. Should we experience unexpected growth, we would reassess boundaries to prevent overcrowding and potentially develop capital improvement plans to address capacity needs in growth areas. Following tonight's presentation, public comments, and your questions, we're requesting that the board accept this amalgamated proposal from the Elementary Boundaries Review Committee as presented. On behalf of the Elementary Boundary Review Committee, I want to express our sincere appreciation to all community and family members who participated in this process. Your insights and perspectives have helped shape a solution that balances immediate needs with long-term planning. Chad and I also want to thank EBRC members for their dedication and thoughtful deliberation throughout this process. And special shout outs go to Angela Files for coordinating EBRC meetings and production of materials, and to Mike Burrow for all of the things data or statistics. Their work was critical to the process. We're confident that this recommendation provides a near balanced path forward that prioritizes educational excellence while being mindful of community impact. Thank you for your consideration, and I now turn it back over to Mr. Check and the board for further consideration.
Before we go on, board members have any initial questions at this time?
I have a couple of questions. I received a number of phone calls this morning. The first parent was wondering about staffing specifics. They have a child with an IEP, and they have struggled to find a teacher that relates to their student, and they finally found one, and they're worried with the move if they're going to have to try to establish a new teacher relationship, and they haven't had good luck before, and they're just wondering what staff specifics they could see, or we could see, that would kind of eliminate that question.
Yes, what would occur is that with students in those particular situations, it's on a case-by-case decision through IEP team development. We do have Ms. McMaster, she's our Director of Special Ed, who can probably elaborate even further.
What I would say is we have really great special ed teachers at all buildings, and so initially what will happen is students will be transferred, whether they're in general education or special education, to the building, and the transition plans of how to do that smoothly, of course, will be a very important part of making sure that they make a smooth transition to the other building. If there was some reason that the building you're transferring to doesn't offer the programmatic services that the building may have, that would be something to consider. But it is a piece of what we still have to work on if you approve this tonight.
Well, I know we have very special ed teachers, but as a teacher, I know that some kids just have an affinity for a certain teacher.
Sure.
And so, and we had a half-hour conversation, and I told her some of the same things that you just said, but I don't see any specifics about what staff is moving, so I'm not really feeling like there's something missing for me in this. But the second part of that question is if they did remain, then would transportation be provided? Like if they were supposed to move, but they remained in that school, would transportation be provided for that student?
It would still be IEP driven.
If it was a request for reassignment process,
Yes.
then we don't provide transportation for students. That's our policy now. If you request to go to another school that you don't go to, and that's approved, the parent is responsible for transportation. If it was a student that needed special education busing, that would need to be a consideration for determining whether or not to approve our request for reassignment based on can you do that. It's not always possible to make these switches of buses across lines.
How many reassigned placements do we have?
I don't know the total.
Yeah. It definitely varies. To your previous comment and to this in particular, a lot of what will be determined during the course of the next several months between now and the start of September will be what do actual enrollment numbers wind up being, and how are these people impacted in that regard. Again, when I go back to saying it's IEP driven, in every case of IEP, everything revolves around that IEP. There have been instances during the course of this district's history and other school districts, during the course of these types of shifts, accommodations may be made. So one of the things that's taken into account during the course of all that is situational. Depends on the child's situation. It depends on what we're able to do through special ed services. It depends on what we're able to do through our transportation provider. For me to give you a solid answer on every single case, I cannot. Yeah. you know, for instance, the information that you have before you, that's based on projected numbers. It's what we know right now. You as board members, you're all, you know, veteran board members in my mind, and you've seen every year it's September, August and September, where things are, you know, very much in flux. You know, enrollments can change tremendously from the 1st of August to the 1st of September. So, you know, these are our best guesses on things. What I do know about this district, particularly for all of our children, but also especially for special ed children, this district has a very caring heart and cares deeply about every student's situation. And we look for ways to help in any shape, form, or fashion that we can. You know, we have to do that within board policy, we have to do that within state law and federal law, but what I continue to love about this district, that we're a district with a heart. And we will try and help those people out the best we can.
Another parent called, they're in section number 2. They initially thought they weren't going to move, and now they're moving. So their question, I said I would ask it tonight so that we can get some further explanation, is when they left here on the 19th of March, right, option 1 had the best ranking. So how did things change from that night to, or what in particular changed that now altered those maps?
I'll take the first stab at it, but then I'll turn it over to Mr. Trowbridge. What occurred on the 19th was we had approximately 80 people in attendance in public session number 2. During the course of public session number 2, based on what we heard that evening and based on the feedback that we received through our survey form, there was a common theme throughout that feedback that people that were on the West Hill did not want to be broken up in any shape, form, or fashion. So the next EBRC meeting that was held, an idea came up about shifting the Area 2 boundary further south, and that way not as many people would be impacted there in Area 1. You know, I think over the course of this district's history, and forgive me for saying it this way, but what is a West Hill resident has changed over time. You know, those people that are now north of Bridgewater, you know, it's one for me where, given everything that I knew from the Elementary Boundary Review Committee about finding ways to balance facilities and address class sizes, that was the fairest demarcation line that could be found. You know, again, I hate that it comes down to will always be people affected by it, and you know, we're now a district where this had to be taken into consideration, and that was one of the reasons why, too, I think that a lot of people liked it, is because at Hillcrest, because of the number of people that did wind up in that area, we were able to grandfather at Hillcrest. Now, the reason we couldn't grandfather at Homestead was because there weren't enough people in that area to allow for that to happen. You know? So it would be easier for us to have been making a line where, you know, the number would have been smaller. But again, geographically, because where certain roads and county roads and street roads are, you also had to take those things into consideration. For us, the only cut through there to get over to Parkview, not the only one, but for people in that area, you know, you had Bridgewater Street and you had S, you know, so it helped with that decision making. You know. So again, that idea came out of the last EBRC meeting, and somebody recognized that and how it could create a scenario that would allow for what we provided here tonight.
absolutely you did. The only piece I would add is, from a class size balancing and a facility utilization perspective, it was a more balanced approach, and it did have some transportation impact as well. There were some nonsensical parts of moving kids through that boundary that was not effective.
Board members have any other questions for the purpose of understanding the administration's presentation? Again, we're going to have plenty of time to discuss our opinions. I want to give board members a chance to fully understand before we go to public comment. Good. All right, we will go to public comment. I don't think that I see the number of names on here that would have caused us concern of our overall time limit. So just the usual, we ask that you state, you're going to have to come up to this microphone here when your name is called. I ask you to state your name, state your address. I do believe all of these addresses are in our district. And then you will have 3 minutes. Go ahead and say what you want us to hear. We'll start with Katie Price. A little longer walk this time.
I know, I was just thinking that. Like, I'm getting a little closer to you guys this time as well. Hello, good evening. Hi, my name is Katie Price. I live at 601 Squire Street. I have the privilege of speaking to you at your last board meeting. While I appreciate the fact that you listened at my last speech and acknowledged the need for community within our school systems, you met the bar about halfway. And here's why. My backyard touches Bridgewater, so the new line. So we still have to move to a different school. We're still very much a part of the West Hill neighborhood. How can my daughter, who plays with a neighbor girl across the street, who's in the same classroom this year, say, hey, we're not going to be at the same school next year? It would make a lot more sense to draw the line at County Highway S at the roundabout, and that would fully include all of those in the West Hill. That is, in my opinion, a much more logical demarcation line. I also have some concerns about how this exact proposal came to be. This was not one that was proposed at the public session a couple weeks ago, and the information just came out yesterday. Again, I appreciate the adjusted proposal. However, this information has come out in a very rushed manner. We don't have the committee's preferred statistical data numbers on this proposal to see how it fares against the other 3 that were presented. So that's a big question mark still. Personally, I would say to not make a decision tonight and make sure all those options are available. Looking at this proposal, this honestly doesn't feel like it's enough of a change to really be worthwhile. I get the concept, I really do. I'm in education myself. But upsetting the community to bring things a little more into balance may not be helpful in the long term, especially with current funding models requiring referendums every couple years. Don't upset your supporters over something small when you're going to need their support for something big later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. I did want to say one more thing, and that is I want the administration to be ready to respond. Board members are in all likelihood going to ask questions regarding what the public speakers are saying, so just be ready for that as well. All right, Amanda Nelson.
Hi, so Amanda Nelson, we live at 1702 Willow Creek Parkway. So we are north of Bridgewater, and I just added, I echo the County Highway S line. We have 5 families in our neighborhood. We literally share the property lines. The kids run through the yards, it's the ultimate cul-de-sac life. We bought our property in the last couple of years, understanding we were staying at Hillcrest, attending where we wanted to. So with this important neighborhood cohesion, 3 of those families are the split, so they have the grandfather and they have the K-2. So assuming they reassign, we have 3 families that would stay at Hillcrest, and then we have 2 that are kindergartners. So our kindergartners would go to Parkview, the rest would go to Hillcrest. So trying to understand how that makes sense when we're going to have busing through the then my kid has to go to Parkview, so there's two bus systems coming through, two transportation routes. I just heard in part of the presentation that if the request for reassignment is approved, transportation is not included. Well, if we have a Hillcrest bus going, then my kid should be able to jump on it if I request for Hillcrest. So my point is, what about the kids in the neighborhood who don't have older siblings? Now they go to a different school, but their friends do not. And these are kids that, I mean, our house is their house, we go back and forth. They are best friends. So I just want to point that out, that the neighborhood cohesion part of it is very important to us, and thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nelson. All right, then we have Jeff Peck.
Hello, I'm Jeff Peck. So I live at 14842 County Highway UN. So I got a couple of things I'll just touch on quick. First of all, I would live in the Homestead number 4 area, which isn't effective this year, but possibly next year. So the first thing I don't understand was at the end of those phases, Homestead would be at 77 and Stilson would be at 90. Why you move our kids to Stilson would be higher. The second, so me and then the one neighbor I talked to also as a kid, both of us currently have after-home daycare. Mine is a person who's in a home, theirs is their mother, and both of us would lose that by moving. So I just wanted to know, because we'd be different school districts then for the busing. I wanted to echo also what they said, if the kids are being grandfathered to consider school reassessment or reassignment and weren't being allowed to have the bus, that should have been noted on there, because that would be just an issue of transparency for families to know that we might let them stay for school, but we're not transporting them. And it hasn't been that many years that the transportation policy's only been, you know, one pickup in the morning and one in the afternoon. It's only probably been 5 to 8 years, and that made things a lot harder for a lot of families. And that was the main point I wanted to touch on here, was what you think is a good thing to stay on top of this. Let's look at this expedited review every year or two, or for sure every 3 to 5. Well, if a kid goes in kindergarten to get to 5th grade, that's a 6-year process right there. And then the flex boundaries thing, kind of like what the first speaker said, this is nothing but disruption. Nobody putting their kids into a school is going to know that their kids are going to go to the same school. And every time you disrupt people, you make it more likely to look for other options. And your whole problem here is having declining enrollments. So people are just going to look more and more at private schools because they're not going to move. I got to drive my kid anyway. And what I really want to touch on transportation and moving this is I don't know if you guys considered in modern day problems, people have kids with other people and people break up and court battles are fought over who gets the kid in the school district, who gets the bus. All those people waiting out line to drop kids off and pick them up for school isn't just because they have nothing else to do. So if we're going to be constantly moving this, every time you move a kid's school, that other parent that lost the first time is going to say, well, I've got remarried, I have stepkids, they should go to my school with this kid. So you guys have really affected a lot of people's lives. It's been 20 years since you've done this, and they're really not that out of whack to begin with. So to say we need to look every year, 2 or 3, to me, just crazy. And then the last thing, just on the presentation, I just thought it was really weird that Jim Fall's numbers weren't there for utilization. I mean, I don't go to that school, but there are schools, so I really have a 5 on there. So, all right, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Peck. I believe that concludes everyone on the list for public comment. All right, next is under matters reserved for board action is consideration of the EBRC presentation and recommendation. Board members, if you want to start with questions for administration, particularly now would be a good time if there are questions related to anything brought up by the speakers tonight.
Taking up the Willow Creek Parkway, if they're really across the street, is this going to be a problem for one stop, as the person that had explained? That was my impression, that they're just across the street. So is the bus stop, can that change? I mean, they're not driving around to make it long.
I think the idea here is that there's a transition period. But the request for reassignment is actually a separate policy, and it is very explicit in that process that transportation is not provided by the district. sense. It is something that is current policy, and it is something that we've explained to people that that's how it's currently written.
You may have the opportunity to adjust those things during transitions as well. To the gentleman who was speaking about the flex boundaries, in most places where that occurs, it's called shared boundaries by a lot of school districts, Division I school districts. One of the things that I can tell you based on my experiences as a superintendent is that for a Division I school district to go 20 years without having to address boundaries, elementary attendance boundaries, is highly unusual. In 2005, when that did occur here, it was about growth. And declining enrollment does make the process much more difficult. In my experience with an elementary attendance boundary redraw in my previous district, it was about growth as well. So during the course of all this, I've learned quite a bit. Transportation, again, we've had those discussions, talked about ways to be more accommodating during the transition years associated with this. And, those conversations won't stop. But we have to work closely with our transportation company in order to make those things occur. Your points in regard to reassignment, reassignment has been here since 2005. It was brought into the district then at the time of redraw then. So reassignment is one that we have to be very mindful of approaching it in a manner that is, we've got to look out for the needs of the district and the student and the family. So while everything that we try to do is based on caring for students, there are aspects of operations of a school district where you have to take multiple things into account. If in a perfect world, I would give you exactly what you want. We would pull up in a van, pick your child up, and bring them to school in a perfect world. But we don't necessarily live in that perfect world. These things are difficult to do. Also, the point that was made about options. We are very mindful that we live in that world of options right now. We're well aware that a couple of new schools are starting up within our district. It's one for us where we must constantly think about those things. And in terms of this plan, it is a long-term plan. The contingency plans are put in there in case something were to truly happen that would throw us off the applied laboratory study. Right now, birth rates in Wisconsin, if you had an opportunity to see that study within the documents that are there, it's amazing to see how, not just in this area, but across the state, people are not having kids right now. Birth rates have dropped tremendously. So the way this plan was developed was one where, yes, certainly in the first 2 years of that transition, there is going to be some transportation issues. People will be seeing buses cross lines and things of that nature. But after the 2 years and once things settle in, if numbers hold true to what we got from applied laboratory, efficiencies should be created from this plan that's been put before the board tonight. So, did I miss anything? Did I leave anything out from the questions that I heard?
There was a question
We'll
about,
have more.
about Jim Falls utilization. It's currently at 87%, and none of the proposed plans affected Jim Falls.
Yeah, we're at a position right now where Jim Falls, that was, at the first public session, there was a huge contingency of Jim Falls here for that first public session. And there was great amount of angst on the part of those folks that they would be closed. Well, Jim Falls, for the past numerous years, has been running utilization rates that have been between 85% all the way up to 90, they've been up to 97%. If I remember correctly, in some of the data that we went through, Jim Falls has been at a 97% utilization rate. So over the, I think, if I'm thinking correctly, also Jim Falls has had an 85% average utilization rate for the past decade, which is pretty good. So their class sizes are hanging in there within the parameters quite well. They only have a couple that are underneath the parameters, and then they have one that's at a bubble. So for us, when you look at that, all those students, if you take them out of Jim Falls and bring them into a new school, the teachers need to follow as well. The transportation costs, adding to, we have a contract with our bus company that is not in terms of number of buses, but it is in terms of mileage that those buses have during the course of the day. So when you start transporting all these people from the northern boundaries all the way back in, you know, you're not able to reduce teaching staff, you're not able to reduce administrative. You would reduce an administrator by closing Jim Falls, but your transportation costs and your continuing teacher costs, it's not cost effective right now to even think about shutting down Jim Falls. I would also tell the board that based on what I currently know and what I've learned through this process, you know, the EBRC forced Chad and I and others, and the EBRC themselves, to do some really deep dives in the data and history of the district and everything else. In 1995, when this district closed First Ward and Quarter Chestnut, at that time there were 7 elementary schools, and they were reduced down and built Parkview School. You know, what I believe personally will likely happen is over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to find out, because of Hillcrest's age and its facilities and small classrooms and lack of infrastructure that is necessary for teaching and learning in a modern age. For instance, when you ask about Stilson's built to handle 90% more so than Hillcrest is able to handle 90%. You know, at 88% right now for Hillcrest, you know, we see a lot of things taking place that it breaks our hearts to have to see at Hillcrest. You know, it's amazing that, you know, in the modern age, you know, you want to do the best you can for all your kids. You know, the schools, Parkview, Southview, and Stilson, you know, they're more modern than all the rest of the schools in the district. You know, Hillcrest is next on the priority list for ATSR's facility study. And, you know, I'm hopeful that the district is able to do something. You know, a lot of this also for us hinges on the fact that we're having to watch what is the state going to do here with their next budget. The operational referendum dollars that I am extremely grateful from this community that you provided to us. You know, the reason we landed on a 3-year administratively in the board, I believe, but I would look for board members to, you know, speak further to this, is tax tolerance in the county that we live in. You know, we debated amongst ourselves of whether to go from 3 years to 5 years in regard to that. And, you know, that this district was willing to pass that was fantastic. And one of the things that Mr. Trowbridge works hard on is state budget and how it applies. He and the group that he's in have done a lot of work here in recent years to get the state legislators to better understand why we don't need to keep going back for operational referendum. So this plan takes into consideration not just this next year, but many years out. We're hopeful that what it does, you don't have to come back for 5 years, but you don't know what's going to happen in this day and age.
So I've got a few questions. First off, change is inevitable. I think you're talking to a person who went to Southside Elementary School where you play pickleball now, so yes, my school's gone. But my questions are, there are a lot of uncertainties yet. Enrollment, the startup schools, we have uncertainties of both state and federal monies. We have reassignment uncertainties. We have siblings transitioning uncertainties. We have impact of the park food uncertainties. My question is, if we defer this for a year, would we be able to better understand and eliminate some of the phases that may happen sooner? Or what are the pluses and minuses of deferring and waiting, knowing that we have some uncertainties that we would like to make sure we do this once and do it correctly?
From my perspective, if you wait, you'll be going through exactly what you're going through tonight, just a year later. You're going to wind up, you're always going to have people who are impacted by it that don't like being impacted by it. And my heart goes out to them. I grew up in a school district where it was, one elementary school. In fact, it was one elementary school, one junior high, one high school all in one building. For full transparency, there were only 12 in my graduating class, so I've had to learn a lot about being in Division I settings. But, in Division I settings, when you have multiple elementary schools, I can tell you without a doubt, based on particularly my southeast Wisconsin experience, there are school districts, Division I, that go through elementary attendance boundary reviews annually.
Yeah, and I understand the boundaries are they, but my concern is the budget cycles and, and knowing our more definite enrollment numbers that we have next year based on some of the startup schools that are out there. So, like I said, putting the boundaries aside, because that's always going to be an issue. Like I said, change is inevitable. At some point, everybody's going to have to accept what it is, whether you like it or not. It's, like as my kindergarten daughter says, you get what you get, you can't throw a fit. But but that's going to happen. But would we be better off knowing where the Fed and the state budget cycles are, and some other things that would help us so we wouldn't have to phase in as much going forward?
The possibility exists. From my perspective, based on what I currently know from federal communications that we receive, particularly listening to what Secretary McMahon has stated about the dollars, they look like in most instances what they're doing is shifting those dollars to other departments. They're just reducing the number of employees there in Washington, D.C. I have seen nothing yet from the feds nor the DPI to indicate that any dollars that we currently receive federally are going to be impacted. What will be different is who we're dealing with on the oversight of those dollars. So at the state level, we were grateful that in the last state budget, they did make adjustments to per pupil allotments. And there's a good movement right now at the state level to see increases. I was very encouraged about communication I saw from Senator Jesse James, who is Republican, but says he's going to do what he can to better improve the funding system for public schools.
Can I just have you elaborate a little bit, because obviously change is difficult, but we have to have a reason for that change. That's what we're here for. So when you say a year down the road, we're essentially going to be in the same spot, what is it about the spot that we're in right now that is that bad that you would encourage it to be now instead of here?
Right. For lack of a better word, I would use overcrowding in Hillcrest and Homestead. you know, a lot of the programming that takes place. Homestead also houses our ELL programming, and ELL programming is starting to grow. Not at a very fast pace, but it is starting to grow. Again, and I don't want to pick on special ed, but sometimes some special ed populations wind up in more schools than others, you know, and that's just based on where people decide to live. Hillcrest, obviously, you know, at 88%, in my mind, given what I know about modern educational service delivery, they're overcrowded. They don't have the ability like Stilson and Parkview and Southview have in order to create greater spaces for the kids to, you know, to give them space, you know, to give them some freedoms and some areas where they can do, you know, some really impactful group learning and things of that nature. You know, y'all forgive me, please, but, you know, I ain't from around here, and as an outside observer, when I walked into Hillcrest for the first time, I love that school, but it's not a modern school at all. Our teachers do a fantastic job in there, not only there, but in all of our elementary schools, to the point made by Ms. McMasters earlier. Now, I'm proud of every single school that we have in this district, you know. I'm not married to amalgamated. If you as a board should decide the way, you know, we as an administrative team will do what we can to, you know, make things work like we always do. But at some point, I can tell you, based on what I currently know, and I've looked for Mr. Trowbridge, you know, some adjustments are going to have to be made. And where we were lucky with Area 2 expanding was that it allowed for not only taking care of things now with those 58 students, but it also allows for any changes, any major changes along the way. You know, I think that's why it wound up with an 82% of, it was either first or second choice among 82% of the EBRC members. So, you know, but again, what I call it, board's will. You know? And I know it's a difficult decision.
I have a couple of questions. The chart with the class sizes, this is if we vote for the changes? Yes? Okay. All right, thank you. Second question, how did the group come up with a 3 to 5 year review? And I'll say that I'm in favor of having a regular schedule of reviewing our boundaries. I mean, you know, I've been around a long, long time, right? I've been through boundary changes as a staff member, and my son was part of the last boundary change. And they are hard, and they're hard on communities. I think if we are very upfront, this is a real tough one, whether it's this year, next year, or sometime. But if we do look at them being more regularly, folks just know that. And I hear, you know, what you guys are saying is it potentially could alter someone's choice on where to send their schools. But I think as it continues to help our schools do their best, by all of those factors, it becomes a little bit less heinous. But I'm just curious about the 35-year number.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. When we last went through this process in 2005, we were growing. So it was balancing utilization rates between buildings in preparation for the possibility of needing a 7th elementary school. You know, looking back, I know things have changed. But with, you know, Mr. Holmes had mentioned birth rates declining. There's a lot of factors that impact whether or not people live here. It's jobs, it's the economy, it's family, it's housing, it's a lot of things. And for us, with those trends of, you know, looking like to decline, you know, where kids in our upper grades are, those class size numbers are higher than kids in our lower grades. So just being mindful of the fact that, you know, we're going to see smaller entry grade numbers than what we're seeing right now was the idea of the 3 to 5 year.
Thank you. And just curious, I knew there was a reason, just didn't know what it was. The other question is maybe going to be more from this side of the room. Title I's time to free and reduced hot lunch, of course. We also mentioned our ELL students. How will these shifts impact the funding potentially? And I know there's a whole lot more. We don't know what federal funds are doing, but in general, how do these shifts impact balance and some of these programs, Title I, ELL, and then again, some of our special ed programs?
It doesn't affect funding for special education. We're funded per pupil, so it's not by what school you're in. There's not that. It's different than Title I, which you definitely talk about that. So there's no funding difference, but we would have to go back and look at our staffing levels to make sure we're appropriately staffed at each building for our special education needs.
And so with that, I mean, conceivably there could be, and this doesn't go to bad, I don't think. I mean, it can be hard, but it's not good or bad. There could be some staffing shifts that are not.
There could be, depending on what special education shifts there were for students, would possibly shift special education staff services as well. That could happen.
Okay, thank you.
In regards to title, yes, they're allocated based on previous rates. And so that's updated every year. And title staffing is confirmed every year based on that. Looking at the numbers that are projected, there's enough consistency that I wouldn't anticipate any huge disruptions. But again, you have to allocate funding based on the needs from across the district based on the current students that you have. And that includes middle school. So some years middle school qualifies for support. And that may shift where some of the support goes. It may shift where some of the staffing goes. Private schools are part of it as well. So if a student lives in an area and now they're being serviced by a school that it does receive title funding, like Parkview, but they previously attended a school, they were assigned to Hillcrest, which doesn't receive title funding. The funds, if they go to a private school and they qualify for support, we have to provide them support based on where their address is. So there are a lot of things on the back side that is something that we do every year. And so it's always fluctuating percentages and allocations with title based on that. Looking at the numbers and the balances, there shouldn't be a significant shift in anticipation of this rolling forward.
So, you think about Hillcrest, which you just said, we know isn't a title school and Parkview is. So the families or the kids that shift from Hillcrest to Parkview, conceivably, some of those children may qualify for some extra support. Conversely, Homestead is title and Stilson is not. So some of the students who right now receive title support at Homestead may no longer receive it at Stilson.
Yes, specifically title. I will say that we provide interventions and additional support from staff for supporting students that are not meeting their growth targets at the rate we would hope they would in every elementary school. So title just gives some additional money to help support that staff, but there is a consistent level that the school district provides for interventions across buildings. So if a student needs support, they're going to get support regardless of what building they're going to. It's just what the dollar or
It's how it's funded. Every elementary school gets the same, those kids get the same support, but it's funded differently in the title situations. But we do make sure that what every child in every elementary school is getting is universal.
I didn't talk about ELL. Do you want me to
Okay,
answer?
so my last, that was going to be a question, is are we committed to keeping our ELL kids together in a place?
Yes, at this time, Homestead's the hub for the ELL program, and that would remain there.
A couple of people mentioned Highway S, and I think from looking at the data, I know why that wasn't selected, but can you elaborate if that was reviewed and why it was not selected as a boundary?
It was reviewed, it was part of that original students. And then based on the feedback from the public input session, that was pretty strong in the survey language that there's opportunity there for it to look different.
When it comes to reassignment, is there a way we could waive the current policies for more of a case-by-case review so that we could better solve problems for a few of these folks that are kind of caught between the hard rock and
Absolutely, it's your policies. You as a board can change those at any time. It's, what I caution is making sure that if you do decide to do that, you need to be mindful that a lot of thought and care went into the development of that policy in the first place. A board, whenever that did occur back in 2005, and Chad was here at that time, so I'm sure a lot of thought went into how reassignment could be done. I know our elementary principals have loads of fun every year with reassignment, and it's one where, again, it's board's will. Yes, you can change it if you like.
I think the only restrictive piece of that policy is the transportation aspect. And if that were waived for a period of time, if the only downside to that, if you call it that, is that it would extend that transition. So when does it stop?
well, maybe for phase one that we, and not to say that we totally disregard the rules, but there's going to be a few cases we're going to go, it just doesn't make sense to, and we need to do something different.
We did consider that when we were looking at, whether or not to just go ahead and make a full move in Area 2. But again, with facility utilization balance and class sizes in mind, that latest report that we were able to provide to the board today, we're getting really, based on what this would look like to plan, you're really seeing some pretty good numbers in that regard. That for that scenario to be only at one bubble, is amazing because we're used to seeing more than one bubble when we're doing our staffing plans.
I guess my opinion, and to kind of talk a little bit about what Steve had to say earlier, was that I think the community itself is going through a lot of changes, in particular with the private schools opening. I agree that optimizing the bus routes, if there was any change, might be something we want to consider prior to enacting any changes. So I can kind of see there being an advantage that way with maybe postponing for a period of time a decision on this. Is there any particular reason why we need to have a decision, or why it would be beneficial to have a decision at this meeting versus maybe having an opportunity to revise some of those policies for transportation, or evaluate a little bit further some of those other metrics, maybe with the private schools, or like a voluntary moving between elementary schools?
I'll take a stab at this, but then Mr. Doerr would probably likely follow up. It's because we're required, and we don't do it just because we're required, it's because it's common sense that staffing plan the board votes on in April, because people, particularly our teaching staff, have to make some serious choices if they get impacted in a way by that staffing plan, that because of declining enrollment, we're constantly worried about, people's jobs. And by the time the board makes their April decision on staffing, we're actually kind of running late in my mind. I know that we did one year go to March with staffing plan, but it's one for me where I would tell you that staffing plan and getting that done by April needs to be maintained. And again, y'all can blame me for not getting to this sooner. My situation, led to kind of a slowdown in the process, but it was one where once we got to this point, once the committee had gone through 18 scenarios, he and I, as co-facilitators of that, oh, by the way, he and I were not voting members of the EBRC, just for full transparency. We have a good sense of the areas, we have a good sense of what all those scenarios did, and, I'm not opposed to the board making adjustments for the transition period and any of those things. Again, like I said before, I'm not opposed if the board should decide to wait. We will do what we need to do in order to fulfill what the board's asked us to do. I believe tonight you got to make a decision one way or the other. We don't have time to spend adequate time on the staffing plan if it were to be delayed for any longer.
In addition to the staffing plan, the notion behind this is so that we were able to give families affected as much notification as possible. I think there are many people in the room who probably are already feeling like this isn't enough time for next fall. So we wanted to be as early in that process as we could be.
I have a question, if we could put off the vote before the staffing plan. Would it help some of the parents if we had like an open house at the schools that their children might be
Oh,
going
it's part of
to?
the plan.
Okay, so,
Yeah, we have a transition plan work within.
I'm just thinking that before we vote on this, this might answer some questions for parents, or they might feel more comfortable with this, because I've talked to at least 10 people in the last 3 days, and there's a lot of angst. So I would like to give them an opportunity to see if we can do something that can make them feel better. Sorry, Ms. Olson, I'm not volunteering you to do an open house, but
I've already given tours, and I'm happy to do as many as needed.
I know you are, thank you.
Mrs. Nor, are we still set? I'm looking at numbers and thinking we are with our main staff, our basic art, PE, all of that. And thinking remains pretty consistent.
Yeah, I think we are able to, when I review the proposal, there is actually an increase in some staffing. So we would have to potentially do some increase in music art by ed as well, to make sure that we're meeting those instructional expectations that we have for our students. But I think we would be able to make those adjustments, but the more time we have to do that, the often the higher quality candidates we have to get here for our students.
And then we don't have any, based with this plan, we don't have, well, I guess if we just stay where we are, do we have a reduction in staff at the elementary? And if we accept this plan, do we have a reduction in staff at the elementary in teaching, classroom teachers?
Correct. So our charge was to stay staffing neutral at the elementary school, looking to stay status quo because we wanted, that's what we knew when we started our work. So we are very close to being staffing neutral at the elementary level if no change is made. Again, as I have reviewed this, and if someone can verify, I believe that we have an increase of 2 sections.
Decrease.
Oh, it is neutral, so then I didn't count correctly, so then it would also be neutral. Thank you.
Superintendent Holmes, while we wait for any possible other questions. I know most of the people in this room probably know this, but can you give the people who may not, maybe an overview of what went into this, what the committee, when they started, what kind of things that they looked at, data, and I'd also like to include that we had 2 board members, board member Philip and Wilson, that were there for all of those meetings. So I just want to know kind of what went into it.
Oh my gosh. From the first meeting on, it was all about data. It was all about looking at statistics surrounding declining enrollment, its impact on the rest of the state, what it's done to us over the past 5 years. Also, we looked at trends in terms of what other districts have done in regard to elementary attendance boundaries. The ATSR facility study was a huge part of the discussion, along with the applied lab study. During the course of the first meeting, it was establishing the mission of the EBRC based on the directions that we had received from the board for looking into this. So the first couple of meetings were really about delving off into all the data that had been provided and looking at it from multiple angles, making decisions about where they would like to emphasize. One of the things that amazed me in the first couple of meetings is how quickly the EBRC recognized that closing Jim Falls was not in the best interest of the district at this time, yet social media posts that were out there were continuing to just, Jim Falls is closing, Jim Falls is closing, and, so after the first couple of meetings, they started delving off to what potential scenarios could look like, about how to go about figuring out areas and so forth. That's where Mike Burrow was extremely useful. His ability to work within the programs that we have surrounding all the data associated with student enrollment, class sizes, and things of that nature were just, his ability to work in those things is amazing. And his ability to provide the community with very, very good, solid information in that regard. Katie Coppenbarger was a key to it as well. She helped tremendously with the elementary side of things, particularly where curriculum and how it should be delivered. It's one of the main reasons I would say too that why we wound up with an emphasis on Wisconsin Act 20 literacy requirements, and why out of the EBRC they recommended changing the K2 parameters to K3 parameters for 18 to 22. So, they looked into everything, that could be found and provided. They worked hard too. They were extremely diligent. Really had an opportunity as co-facilitators to look at Chad to confirm, but never at any point during the course of those meetings did I find that EBRC members were nonchalant in any shape, form, or fashion. They were truly engaged in it, and their conversations were highly engaging and highly thoughtful. The original scenarios that they brought were a total of 13 scenarios. So, out of that work, bringing those, the scoring mechanism that was finally determined, it was truly data-driven, but I would also say that EBRC members truly thought about things with both their head and their hearts. So that was also great to see. Once those 13 had been scored, and we had had the first public session, taking into consideration what we had heard at the first public session, that's how two consolidated scenarios came about. And also our elementary principals had spent quite a bit of time thinking about it as well. They provided another scenario. And then, particularly after public session number 2, that was how amalgamated came out. We took the best of the top 5 scenarios and looked at ways to be able to fit into something that could be mindful of everything that the EBRC had looked at. So, and then we also got, based on public session feedback, we did get a score from the EBRC in regard to no change. What did it wind up being? It was like 10? Was no change 10 in the scoring? Yeah, somewhere around there. So, I would tell you that there was no point in time where I felt like folks weren't working hard to try and make the best decision that they could make on behalf of the district.
I have no questions. May I?
Am I stopping?
May
I mean, you
All
got
right,
so
thank
many
you.
more votes than me last night.
Life is good sometimes. Anyway, you know, the bubble is so cool to only see one bubble at this point in the new plan. I wish we had, if we hadn't had a new plan, so we could compare that. Do we know how many bubble classes there would be if we delayed making a decision tonight?
Sarah might be able to provide that.
I'll let you do that. And then, Chad, I think I heard you say this, but I just want to clarify. We would need to add two, I mean, this in here, we need to add 2 buses, but that wouldn't cost us more because we pay by miles and not buses. Is that true?
I didn't say that.
Okay, well, see, I'm just trying to put it together here.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, we would look to find efficiencies in other areas to negate that.
Okay, thank you. So I was wrong, and
We
that's why
do
I
know
asked the
that right
question.
now, based on those line shifts, what you would see is 106 students are impacted because of the line shifts and the transportation shifts. So,
And then it's probably in here, so I'm going to apologize, but just to wrap my head around, how many kids right now will we project to move from Hillcrest to Parkview, and then how many kids from House to Lisbon?
it is approximately,
You know, it's 100 or so total, but just curious.
right, it's 24 to 28 in Hillcrest, so it's almost even, it's close to even. I think it may be 32 max at Homestead, something of that nature. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I did not pull my numbers today, so I apologize for that, but it would be more around this area of 41 sections at our parameters, and then again, it is K3. 10 would be above, and those would be in our primary grades, K1 and 2. And there would be 35 sections that are below our parameters.
So right now, with this plan, we have 1.
Correct.
And if we were to stay the course, it would be 10.
Correct.
We will have time for additional questions, but I did also want to have the opportunity for the 2 board members that were there for every single one of those meetings to maybe share their insights as well. I don't know if you want to say a few things. You want to go ahead, Nick?
Sure, I think the process went very well. Steve and I attended the meetings. We didn't vote, we were there just to listen to the committee members and watch the process that they went through. It was a large group. They went through a lot of data, and again, a thank you to Mike Burrow for pulling that data and putting it together for the people and the maps and whatnot. I was part of the 2005 Boundary Change Committee, and we didn't have that technology, so it was nice to have that. I appreciated the people, the work that they put in, as well as the process and the public comments and whatnot that we received.
Yeah, it was, like you said, their passion as we got going to doing boundary lines, because they all knew the boundary lines, they all knew the numbers and stuff, and they were very versed on that, and they cared. They were looking at the students and asking all the questions that you've been asking, and I was very thankful for the efforts they put in, and the thankless time. I think there was probably 5 or 6 meetings, and some of those meetings took 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So it was, they put a lot of effort into it.
Board members, additional questions?
Is there any numbers on what possibly could be next year's kindergarten sizes? What would they? Oh, okay. Thank you.
So when you gave the bubble classrooms, how many of them would be like the 3 through 5 that could have some grandfathered students?
Sorry, on our current situation or on the shift?
On our current situation.
So in our current situation, there are, if I'm understanding the word bubble correctly, there are no classes in 3, 4, or 5 that are above our current parameters. They're either at or below our parameters in 3, 4, or 5.
Just looking at the sheet again, it appears that the incoming classes are going to be much smaller than the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. In 5th grade, we're to graduate next year, and the incoming kindergarten is the same size as what we have projected here. That school would be losing 20-some students, and if that continued, they'd lose 20 the next year. So is that something that, am I reading this correctly?
Yes, you are. It's one of the reasons why we had to let the gentleman know why we need to go to probably 3 to 5 years on it, is because of declining enrollments. The applied lab numbers received are quite concerning in that regard. The birth rates here in our area and the rest of the state are not good. If you think about it in terms of, the past and how people did have more kids. I think also people have become much more mobile as well.
Well, my thinking is that in a couple of years, most of these schools would be down considerably. So that plays into my thoughts of why would we do this now and not, as Mr. Olson had suggested, pushing it off a year. So maybe next year when the numbers come out and we're looking at these, we're seeing reductions of 20, 30, 40 kids in each one of these schools. Then those numbers might push us in a different direction. I'm not so sure that this is it's a difficult question, I guess. But anyway, not a question, I guess, just a comment.
I would add that those kindergarten numbers are what we know as of today. So we anticipate that they will grow, and there is capacity for them to grow within all of our elementaries. It's the most pertinent data we have as of today.
Board members, we've had a lot of questions. Now you can also, if a board member would like to make a comment, make their thoughts known. I know Mr. Olson, I think, wanted to go last because he's been through the meeting before, or been through the meetings. But board members, this is the time for us to discuss our opinions as well.
I just want to thank everyone that put in the time on this. I know this was a heavy lift, no small task. I just wanted to let everybody know that I appreciate their time before we vote on this.
I'm struggling because a lot of me says, let's wait, because we just have so many moving parts in our community right now. Let's wait for a year. Weighing that with, not the ripping off the Band-Aid, because you're right, if we delay it, we're going to be back next year. It's still a lot of emotions, and that's hard. It's hard stuff for families. But I think for me, the piece is the classroom bubbles. And if we can get classroom sizes to a point where behaviors can be learned and taught
and kids can find a place to belong and curriculum can happen because of those things. That's pretty hard to say no to.
I guess I struggle with this just because, you know, you look at the bubble situation and we want the classroom sizes to give our kids the best opportunity to learn. There's so many moving pieces out there that we don't know with enrollment and stuff. And yes, we would be here next year. Like I said before, change is inevitable. We will be making changes. But I wonder how much more information we need to make a good change so we're not phasing in something as quickly as we should. Like I said, as far as the redistricting, you know, that's going to happen sooner or later it's going to happen. The concern is, are we going to be doing some changes with the information we don't have? You know, the funding and all the other issues that I mentioned before. So I struggle with this. I understand why we need to do it, but I still struggle with it.
So,
I would agree with what you have to say on that, Steve. I think there's an opportunity that we have to evaluate some of the policies for busing, to optimize those when the time comes, but I just think there's a lot of moving pieces, and with the private schools coming in, and we just don't really know exactly where things will be. And if we take one more year and a couple more community meetings, maybe we'll have a better idea of if and where we can shuffle people. That would be my thought.
I guess my one question would be, if we did defer, you know, are we putting our principals and our staff in a position where they're going to have overcrowding and we're going to have issues, or is this something that you as administrators are going to have to sit down and figure out ways of making this kid the best education? You know, like I said, at the end of the day, it's always about the kids, and I don't want, you know, that's what's hard with this decision, is because we have to think about how it's going to impact kids.
I would tell you from my perspective as a superintendent, you know, that every year is a hard year to make those kind of decisions. You know, our elementary principals are all extremely caring individuals. They do want to put students first. And where, again, I commend, you know, everybody that I work with in Chippewa Falls Area Unified School District. We're a district that does the best we can with the resources we have available to us. Do I wish we had greater resources? Do I wish that we could not have to worry about these things? Absolutely. But it's also one of the things when I decided to become an administrator, I knew I had to take these things on, and I take them extremely seriously. I don't, while I'm a very jovial person, every decision that I make is generally winds down to asking myself, am I doing right for a child with the resources I have available to me? Again, we are a district right now where resources can be quite limited, and it's only going to potentially get worse. Where I am seeing rays of light, like when I brought up Senator James, who is a longtime Republican, you know, you don't get to hear those things being stated there out of Madison. So I do think that there's hope for the state to, you know, readjust how they approach public education funding. Regardless of what happens with the other schools that have become options here in our district, you know, our estimate is the possibility for 100 students, maybe. You know, it's not looking that way, but we took that into consideration earlier. If 100 students leave here, you're still looking at having to serve 4,600 students. You know, we're still going to have to do our jobs. We're still going to be teaching a lot of kids. And we are a school district that has to do many things to many different people. You know, that there will always be people that decide that they need to go somewhere that it's a niche. You know, that they want it for, they zero in usually on one particular thing that they want for their child. Well, in public school settings, it's not that case. And again, one of the things that I greatly appreciate about this district, particularly since 2018, when we did make changes regarding Stilson, when you improved the middle school for its learning opportunities, and certainly at high school with the career and technical education aspects, you know, I do believe that this district, based on what I've heard in the community conversations, is that we're on the right path. We're seeing a lot of great evidence in that regard. We're watching, particularly right now since Wisdom was brought into the district, we're seeing vast improvements in our reading levels among our elementary kids, and we're now starting to feel those things already within the last 2 years, moving its way up. Again, I would go back to, and I would look for Mr. Trowbridge to elaborate further. Again, we're not married to amalgamated. You know, it is one of those things where I know that board members, you're all thoughtful people, you know, you use your minds well, but you are a board also that is much like us in the community that you live in. You do have hearts, and this is a heart-wrenching process. So, you know, we as administrators, and I'm speaking on behalf of all staff, you know, we will do what we need to do to make whatever your other side work to the best of our abilities.
The only piece I would add to that is it would be wonderful if there was a perfect decision, but I don't think you're ever going to see that. Again, I appreciate the work that the group did. Regardless of the outcome, like Mr. Holmes said, we'll do the best we can with what we have, no matter what.
Ms. Jasper, if I could just clarify your neutral staffing question. So it is, as I'm looking through various spreadsheets, it does appear that it will be neutral for how we are currently staffed, but that was after the decision of our board to add 2 additional teachers last August, one at Homestead and one at Hillcrest. And so know that the staffing plan that we are working under is built off the staffing plan that was approved for 24-25, so it did not include those 2 positions. So it is staffing neutral for what is in our schools right now, but to be neutral for what has been approved in the past, we are looking to staff at 2 fewer staff members, which does impact the potentially, right, the number of bubble classes or classes above our class size recommendations. Is that clear and make sense?
Mr. Miller, does that include the 3 full-time interventionists that are on the staffing plan?
The interventionists are part of a curriculum and instruction staffing plan, not the classroom teacher staffing plan, so no, it does not include the interventionists or instructional specialists.
Ms. Nurse, so if we adopted the EBRC recommendation, it would really be the same as far as...
It would be the same as this year, currently, but not what was approved
So
a year ago for the budget and staffing.
So if we stay as we are the same as what we approved last year. If we move to this plan, then we are adding 2 additional elementary staff.
In our staffing plan, yes.
Okay, thank you. I just, you know, because I understand what you're saying, but I figured if I said it out loud, then I would make sure we were both, okay, thank you.
All right, board members, it seems like we've answered asked the questions that we had, made the comments that we had to make. Now's the time if any board member would like to make a motion. Feel free to do so.
Mr.
No, you did, and typically as the president, I sort of observed that because I have a feeling a lot of this is gonna come down to seeing how everyone votes here, and I always have the last vote. But since you asked, I mean, I would say, you know, the one thing that strikes me is the fact that if we don't do anything, we have 10 very highly populated classes, and we didn't want that. We told the district to do something about it, and that's what they spent the last 6 years. That's why I don't know how far back it went, but it, long time spent on it. 2 board members spent their nights on it, and I know just like when we built the schools, or had the referendum, not easy. All of these answers are missing puzzles. Somebody's gonna be upset. But ultimately, if we don't do anything, we've got some serious problems with 10 classes. Last year, I think we had 1 problem. We had Hillcrest, and that caused enough of a problem, just with that being overcrowded. So, I mean, I struggle because I know it would come to me potentially with 2 votes, and I don't want the fact that there's 2 board members that would mean are obviously uncomfortable with going forward right now. I mean, but that's where I'm at with it. So, we do need a motion of some sort.
I will make a motion to accept the EBRC recommended boundary change as presented.
Motion by McKillop. Is there a second? Second by Fear. Any further discussion? Clerk roll call, please.
Aye. Ms. Spear. Sherry Jasper. Aye. Dave Martin. Steve Wilson.
You know, that puts me in a more difficult spot because it's going to fail no matter what, and I don't want to put the pressure on Sharon to come back if it's 3-3 and then we have another meeting. So I'll vote nay. All right, board members have voted. It is 4 to 2. The motion has failed. So any other motions? Motion.
Based on what I know about its budgeting, you know, Chad, you let me know if I'm thinking correctly, but I would say November. Right now, based on what we know from legislators, is that there's a good chance we may not know what our final budget is until October. So, in my mind, November would likely be the time to bring it back.
I appreciate that, and because I was thinking fall, we'll know the bubbles, we'll know, you know, if we did lose kids or gain kids.
You definitely need to get through the September pupil count. October is a huge budget month for the board, and then once everything gets finalized, you vote on the budget there in October. So, you know, November makes sense to me.
And a lot of the preliminary work, you know, it has been done, and it will need to refine and recheck. But
It'll be a brand new process.
do you think so?
Absolutely.
What we'd be, either way, we'd be talking about for the fall, like we're not going to do anything in the middle of the year. So the question is really maybe more for administration. What would be the ideal time to have an answer from us? Is this too late? Would we want it at
myself. I would have liked for y'all to been able to make this decision like in mid-March. You know, I do believe that April and May do allow for ample time for families to transition and come to grips with it, and then by September of the following, the next school year, you know, things have normally taken place that allows for those transitions to be done rather seamlessly.
So Dennis, did you want to make your motion to table this until March of next year? Oh, excuse me, just November?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of moving parts. November is a good time to evaluate this.
Motion by Fear, is there a second? Second by Martin. Any further discussion? Clerk, roll call, please.
Dennis Fear. Aye. Chair Casper, aye. Dave Martin. Aye. Without order, Madam Chair, Ms. Martin. Chair Bevelman, absent. Peggy Hill. Aye. Steve Olson. Aye. Dan Chapman.
Aye. Motion carries. This will be tabled until November. That's the last item on our agenda, so now I would look for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Martin, is there a second? Second by Fear, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion stands, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you everyone for your time.